Hello, everybody, and welcome to another video. Today it is the 5th of November, and I will be doing a general frontline summary today. And so we're starting off in Kherson, where there hasn't been that much news. I think this is because we are heading into another one of those media blackouts, not only from the Ukrainian side, but also from the Russian side. And so usually this happens before there is some major movement in Kherson. We saw this happen about a month ago when the Ukrainians took over some of the towns in northern Kherson. And now we're seeing it again, especially because we haven't really seen a lot of information about the movement of troops in a while. We did actually get some news from Russian sources, though, of Ukrainians increasing their shelling. And there are some specific units involved in this. You had the 28th Mechanized Brigade operating in the southern part of Kherson, attacking towns like Oleksandrivka, Stanislav, Sofivka, Tominabalka. You have a lot of VDV units in here. Also, Kislivka, of course, a key town in between the city of Kherson and the front line. Also, of course, you have the 59th Motorized Brigade. This unit is stationed a bit further north, and so the Russian positions in Snihorivka were hit. There was actually reports from the locals over here that one of the bridges was damaged in this town. I'm not sure where it was. Maybe it was along the Inhulets River or something. But anyway, you also had news of the 63rd Mechanized Brigade shelling a lot of the Russian positions, especially around Blahodatne and some of these other towns on the front line. And so specifically for the 63rd Brigade, they have a artillery group that has been inflicting a lot of damage on the Russian defensive lines in recent days. They're using a wide variety of both towed and some self-propelled artillery. And so the rate at which they've been firing and shelling the Russian positions has steadily increased in recent days. And so this might be indicative of a coming offensive. In preparation for whatever offensive is coming up, the Russians have been constructing three layers of defensive lines, and these will be on the left bank of the Dnieper River. So I'm sure they also have some defensive lines on the left bank over here, but they will also have some on the river and just south of it. So, of course, the first line will be the river itself. Then the second line will be based on the road from Hola Pristan to the national park and the areas just south of Kakovka and Nova Kakovka. This is a good defensive line because if Ukraine was able to cross the river, they would just be stuck in a very low elevation area. And in those floodplains, setting up positions would be very unattainable, especially with Russia digging in along the roads and just inflicting heavy casualties on anyone who set foot in these southern areas. There's also another line a bit further to the south. I think it's around here, basically, just another layer of defense in case the Ukrainians are perhaps able to reach the Kinburn Spit from Ochakiv, and then from there link up with whatever Ukrainian troops are able to advance south of Kherson. But this is really just to strengthen the rear, and there are many defenses on the right bank of the river as well, most notably around Kislivka over here and Chornobaivka. Around Kherson, now that a lot of the civilians have been evacuated, you're going to see a lot of new defensive positions being set up over there. I'm sure you also have a lot set up in Berislav over here. And obviously, you have the current defensive line, which has proven that it could hold even though there have been very intense Ukrainian bombardments and nearly daily assaults from recon units on those lines. So clearly, they have been able to hold at least to a certain extent. But anyway, the southern part of Kherson was not the only part that was hit by shelling. We also have reports from Russian sources specifically of the 61st Jaeger Brigade hitting the Russian positions just to the south of Dudchani, this entire area. And they were from the vicinity of Petropavlovka and perhaps Maiske. There is a artillery post set up over there. It's actually just like a open field, agricultural land. You don't actually have anybody living in this so-called town. So it does look like a good place to set up artillery. And according to the same Russian sources, the Russians had actually struck this area and damaged some of the artillery. I'm sure that the Russians are utilizing the Lancet drones, Cube drones, all these other like smaller kamikaze drones to hit these artillery systems that have been attacking their positions much more in recent days. And so, in addition to all of that, the Ukrainians are sending in a lot of reinforcements from several towns, most notably from Berezhne which I've talked about for a very long time as being one of the main supply hubs for the Ukrainians to conduct their counterattacks and their offensive operations in Kherson. So really, from Brezhne you have supplies either going towards the southern front through this road that leads to there, or it could go south directly towards Snihorivka in that entire sector of fighting, which has been relatively unchanged in recent months, or it could go through the highway towards this local road and then across a pontoon bridge to the front line around the Andrivka bridgehead, which is being held together by the grouping at Davidiv Breed, where you do have a lot of Ukrainian units holding the line. And so I don't have specific numbers on the reinforcements and from which units they're coming from. That would be very interesting to me to get that information. But we did actually see a very interesting video. I think it was from the Davidiv Breed area of a very large contingent of, I think it was tanks and also like BMPs, and they were just all ready to go and begin to conduct offensive operations in the direction of this road towards Bruskinske, for instance. A lot of new reinforcements coming in, especially to Davidiv Breed. That is the main message that we have received. Now, in addition to all of this, there is also news from the city of Kherson itself that the Russians have actually cut off the internet and phone connections. Those were all disconnected in the city. It seems as if the Russians are almost done getting people across the river, and so you basically have no civilians left in Kherson. And if there are, then they will probably be evacuated in the coming days, especially because it is untenable to stay living in these regions without any sort of Wi-Fi. And I'm sure now that there's gonna have they're gonna have issues with like their gas supply or their water supply, electricity, all of that stuff. And so that's going to further incentivize the civilians to voluntarily leave instead of actually being deported physically. And so that also implies that the Russians are either evacuating their own men or they are doing some sort of troop rotation as well, uh, using the civilians and the civilian evacuation to sort of conceal the troop rotation, or it's just a way for them to better fortify the city of Kherson in anticipation of the coming battles. Now, that's it for Kherson. We will be moving on to the Pavlovka front, where really the Russian progress has stalled. They did have a day or two of advances in this area, actually entering Pavlovka, reaching Vuhledar Novomikhailivka as well, and gaining a few blocks in Marinka. But it seems as if they have slowed down in recent days and that they have basically left Pavlovka. Ukrainian sources report that they have actually fully withdrawn from the town and that they are now back in their original positions around Yaharivka. According to the Armed Forces of Ukraine daily report, though, they mentioned that there were Russian attacks in the direction of Pavlivka and also the towns of Novomikhailivka and Marinka. Those are a bit further to the north over here and over here. Also, we did get a new video released by the Cascod Battalion, one of the best DPR units, showing how they hit some Ukrainian armored personnel carriers. And so in the video, you can see that four of them were damaged out of the seven. They were basically stationary, so maybe they were sort of rotating troops or sending reinforcements to the front lines, and they were just parked for a few moments. And during that time, there was an artillery barrage called on those positions, and they were relatively exposed because in this area, if you're stuck in a road, there's really no place to go because there's just like apartments surrounding you on every single corner. And so you're just stuck in this choke point along a thin road that goes in one of two directions. And so that's a very difficult situation for the Ukrainians. It also shows that the DPR is actively involved in these offensives and that the Russian plans or the Russian pressure on this front has not stopped. Perhaps the entire point of this from the beginning was just to tie down Ukrainian troops in a different part of the front line so they can't be sent to, say, Kherson or to Svatove, where they could have been used to actually make further gains. That is also a possibility. And especially given the fact that Russia has really failed to capitalize on their original gains, that could be a part of the reason why perhaps they just never had intentions of attacking in the first place. We don't really know. But anyway, let's move on to the Donetsk Front, where we have reports of recent Russian attacks in the direction of Nevsky over here. I don't have specifics. It's also possible that my map is sort of overestimating the Russian control by a few blocks because basically every single one of these hedgerows is a sort of a block in and of itself, basically just a fortress. And so it's possible that some of these hedgerows are actually still under Ukrainian control and that they have control with some like trench lines or something. I might be wrong, but again, they reported in the past 2 days specifically that there were very heavy clashes around Nivelske. Nivelske is where you have the forward artillery positions of the Ukrainians, and so it is important for the Russians to take this town, especially to secure their flanks and to actually attack the Ukrainian flanks as they want to reach Nitalove and obviously take full control of Pervomaiske, where they've been stuck in the southern part of the town for about 3 weeks now. Then again, no updates from Vodiana or Pitny. I might be underestimating the Russian gains in Opitny by a little bit. It's possible that they have control of everything to the south of these ponds, but I'm not exactly sure. It is also possible that Ukraine still has like a trench line around the ring road in this specific area. So now moving on to Majorisk, we have reports from both Russian and Ukrainian sources that there has been heightened fighting in this area. The Ukrainians reported that the Russians suffered very heavy casualties in their continued assaults on Majorsk, this key rail hub, obviously not being used for transporting cargo or rail supplies anymore. But nonetheless, it is an important fortified area which is holding back the Russians from advancing north towards Ozarianivka and Kordiumivka, Zelonopilia, all those areas. So it is sort of relieving Ukraine of some of the pressure that they would have suffered if it had already fallen. I actually have a video geolocated over here of the DPR shelling the town of Majorsk. It's not just a train station, but it also is sort of like this urban settlement, very similar to Horlivka or Zaitsev. And so you have apparently the 3rd Guard Spetsnaz Brigade operating in this area. I might be confusing this for the 3rd DPR Brigade, but I've seen them used interchangeably, so I'm not exactly sure which unit is the one that's shelling the Ukrainian positions in this area. But they've been doing this for a very long time. We have videos from a month ago of them doing the same thing. And despite all of that shelling, the houses are still standing and they could still be used to hide from the Russian artillery. You can see that basically this entire area is incredibly fortified. I just have one area marked with trenches over here. You can see this is one of many fortified areas around Majorsk. And so it's part of the reason why it's so hard to take over this town, because Ukraine really has put a lot of resources and a lot of defensive positions in this specific area. There were also reports from the Ukrainian side of Russian attacks on Ozaryanivka, on Kordiumivka, on Klishchivka, on Opitny, on Bakhmut, on Bakhmutske, and of course on Soledar. But they did not acknowledge any gains, and so it's possible that all of these assaults were futile. Now, the Russians, they reported that the 53rd Brigade, and specifically the 2nd Battalion of the 53rd Brigade, was trying to counterattack from the Opitny and Kordiumivka area. And so Opitny and Kordiumivka aren't that close by. And so that would sort of imply that the Ukrainians tried to do an all-out counterattack on this entire line and perhaps push towards Odradivka, where they had positions very close to the town a few weeks ago. The Russian sources say that this attack was unsuccessful and that the wounded were evacuated to the nearby towns of Klishchivka. This is really the forward medical base. I guess if there's like some field hospital set up, then it would be in Klishchivka, just to treat people that are in dire need of quick surgeries. And then I guess for people who have more serious situations, but need to go to an actual medical institution, they would have to go to the hospitals in Kostiantynivka. You see, there are several of them: City Isolation Hospital, Town Hospital number 5. We also heard of reports that the 112th Territorial Defense Brigade, which was previously situated in Kiev, this unit over here has now been moved into Bakhmut. And so this is not the first territorial defense unit to be in Bakhmut. We also have the 115th Detached Territorial Defense Brigade, and this was originally stationed in Zhytomyr, moved in. And you can see that these territorial defense units, although they're not the best trained, they have done a lot in slowing down the Russian advance. And so now even more reinforcements are being sent in, perhaps as Russians continue to heighten their assaults in this area. We did sort of see a lull on this front for about a week, but now Russia has like sort of heightened their attacks. We also saw unconfirmed reports online that the Wagner group had broken through the first Ukrainian line of defense near Bakhmut. But really, those sort of broad and very like vague statements, they aren't of much utility, especially when there isn't any evidence provided. We've really seen so many of these false rumors spread around, thousands of them, tens of thousands of them, and you just forget about it in a day because it doesn't happen. That's usually what happens. But anyway, let's move on to the Severus Front, where we did actually have reports of the Russians trying to restart their momentum over here, attacking towards Spirny. This town still hasn't changed hands. Ukraine's still mostly in control of it. And then also a lot of attacks reported on Bilohorivka. It's now being said that the Wagner Group is sending some of their best assault companies to the city of Lysychansk. And then from there, they're probably going to either be sent to attack Bilohorivka or Spirny. Wagner Group is probably the best unit that Russia has in this entire area, and they were responsible for preventing a larger Ukrainian breakthrough around Spirny when Ukraine took back the town, which could have threatened this entire substation and gas compression facility in Verkhnokamianske. So Wagner Group basically has command control in this entire sector. You did have O Group in here before as well. And to end the video, let's talk about the Luhansk Front. Not many changes to speak of, but we do have more of the same, and so I'll get into that. You have the 66th Brigade. I think this is the 66th Separate Mechanized Brigade, yeah. They were reported as attacking in the direction of the Kremina, Chervono-Popivka, Ploschanka line. No real success from this. Again, it's just these probing operations. We've seen many of them. The Ukrainian momentum has significantly slowed down once they reached the Svatove-Kremeny line. And again, going into the mud season, rough terrain in this area, that is certainly understandable. We also saw reports that the 14th and 29th Brigades were conducting these probing attacks a bit further to the north, centered around the towns of Kuzhemivka and then also around Kislivka, Yahidny. You did have some attempted breakthroughs from Tabaivka, trying to attack the Russian positions in this area, but none of that actually turned out to be successful. You have a newly formed unit, the 71st Jaeger Brigade, which is now fighting in the area around Kislivka, probably being sent in to help finally take over the town, which is a key supply hub, and it would be a big deal to the Russians if they had to withdraw from this town. And so they've held on to it for a very long time while they've withdrawn from many others. They have been adamant in remaining in control of Kislivka specifically. Also, we did get a interesting geolocation a bit further to the south from the outskirts of Ploshchanka. And over here, you can see the 95th Brigade. You notice the 95th Brigade because you could see on the video that they have this logo, the same logo that I have on my marker of the 95th Brigade in Olhivka. I might move them up towards Makivka or Harkivka because they are now operating in this area. So probably one of their reconnaissance companies was responsible for this video. They were basically advancing through the ditches over here because you can see there are several ditches, several lines of bushes that the Ukrainians have to pass through. And so they were probably able to use scouts to get through that went unnoticed. And so they were able to reach the one road that connects to Ploshchanka from the south. And so from there, they destroyed several Russian tanks, the scouts. And so this doesn't imply that Ploshchanka is contested because, first of all, the video was on the outskirts of Ploshchanka, and this was a forward operating unit. It's not too difficult for them to reach, to go from Makivka to this area just on the outskirts of Ploshchanka. They literally do it every day, but they just can't stay there because eventually, if they set camp over there, they're going to be shelled by the Russians. And so it's more so these hit and run attacks that we've been seeing very recently, and that's Ukraine's strategy going forward, especially into the winter. I do not see many more breakthroughs from that area specifically. But thank you all for watching, and I'll see you later.